Welcome to the Mission First People Always podcast. We're glad you're here. And now our host, Dr. Mike Patterson.
It's Dr. Mike Patterson, your host of the Mission First People Always podcast, where we talk about what it takes to be a great leader and how to build a great team. Today, my guest is Jody Orgill Brown. Jody is a partner and a keynote speaker with Global Leader Group, where she helps strengthen organizations by empowering individuals. Through her speaking, coaching, and writing, she helps people build systems to increase their capability to thrive amid stressors and lead at any level. So Jody's a survivor, and today's story is really a story about coming back stronger, getting through tough times, and Jody's got a great story to tell. In fact, it's an amazing story of survival and renewing her strength during her ongoing battle with cancer. In her words, she was living a white picket fence life in Utah, raising a young family and thriving at work when she was diagnosed with a brain tumor. 15 surgeries and dozens of complications over 12 years have given her a new, intimate understanding of both the receiving and giving sides of life. Jody, I'm honored to have you as my guest today on the Mission First People Always podcast. And we're going to talk about building an anti-fragile team. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
You know, in the intro, I summarize your lived experience, but tell our listeners a little more about your story. I mean, it's a powerful story, and give us an update on kind of where you are in your journey, and we'll go from there.
Sounds good. First of all, I guess the definition of my white picket fence life meant at that time that I was raising 4 children. I was working in a profession that I loved. I am a nonprofit manager and nonprofit consultant, something I'm very passionate about, have loved doing for years and years. I have lots of education. I have a master's degree in organizational communication and leadership, love helping organizations, leading organizations. And of course, my family, I had 4 young children who I adored, and I never knew that I would give birth to my best friends, but indeed I have. And I was really just at a stage enjoying raising these young ones and getting to see their little personalities start to blossom as they got older. So my kids were between the ages of 2 and 10. And my husband and I have been married for a dozen years at that point in time, and we're just best friends. We met while doing a semester abroad, living in the Holy Land in Jerusalem years before. And we had created just a beautiful foundation for our relationship. So that's what it means when I say living my white picket fence life was really, I had achieved or was living all of the things that I had ever really wanted to. I really thought things couldn't get any better. But of course, things are never going to stay static. And I started having some, what now I know to be symptoms, but at the time I just saw them as individual issues. I started having dizzy spells, and then I started having issues with vertigo and with terrible, terrible headaches. Some people have dealt with headaches their whole lives, but that was something that was new for me. And so going through some of these things just made me think, gosh, what is wrong? And I went to the doctor, actually several times. I went to the doctor when I had the terrible dizzy spells, and I got diagnosed with what was likely an inner ear infection and told I just needed to be patient and give it time. And that sounded perfectly legitimate to me. I was young and otherwise healthy. I was 32 years old. And really, it made sense to me that that's what it was. And every time I went back to the doctor, I went for an individual issue. I went and said, hey, I'm having these headaches. And the doctor said, well, you know, you work full time, you have 4 young children, you volunteer in the community and in your church. You're probably experiencing tension migraines, and here's some painkillers that you can take during the time that things are bad. And again, that sounded very legitimate to me. And it wasn't until many months down the road that I really was becoming debilitated to the point where I was so dizzy and had so much pressure in my head all of the time. I could barely walk down the hall of my home because my head was just spinning all of the time. And my husband came home from work one day and asked how I was doing. And I admitted I was not doing well. And with more vehemence than I'd ever heard come out of his mouth, he said, Jody, something is wrong with you. You need to go back to the doctor. I know you've been, but you need to go back and we need to keep looking until we figure out what it is. And that was when I realized, okay, if this is impacting me so much that my husband feels so strongly about it, I need to keep going. I need to keep looking. We need to find a solution. So I called the doctor, told them I needed to come in again, told them what we wanted to proceed with was that we needed to figure out what was really going on. And we did a series of blood tests and family histories, did a series of tests in the doctor's office. And I remember the doctor's office calling me and one of the assistants telling me that, hey, Mrs. Brown, we've gotten your results back. Your blood tests are good. You're good. And that day, I was absolutely not good. And I knew that there was something wrong. And so I said, you know what? I know I'm not doing well. And maybe it's not showing up on these tests, but that just means we need to take some more steps. Please ask the doctor what the next steps are. And a few minutes later, she returned and said, well, he said the next step is an MRI of your brain. We had that scheduled. And when I showed up for the MRI, I was the first patient of the day and got in, did the MRI, and was ready to leave the hospital when all of a sudden someone came and literally chased me down and said, oh, good, you're still here. Because you are the first patient of the day, the radiologist is actually looking at your scans live as they come in. And he's not sure, but he thinks he might see something and wants to know if you could stay, get back in and do another MRI, this one with some contrast dye so that they can get a better look. Well, I didn't know what to expect from that. We put the contrast dye in and I got back in the MRI and I just kept thinking, they found something. There's some little spot on my brain. What does that mean? And I didn't know what that meant. But I'll tell you, my initial reaction was positive. I thought, I've known something was going on. This makes perfect sense that there's something there. Now we can get in, take care of it, and my life can go back to normal. And several minutes later, when I finished the MRI, I was still feeling that positivity right until the moment when the MRI tech came in the room and she leaned down and said to me, Mrs. Brown, there is definitely something there. Go home and call your doctor immediately. And good luck to you. And she threw her arms around me and gave me a hug.
Whoa.
And I thought, oh my gosh, what does she know that I don't know? And that started a whole new life for me, honestly. I went home and I waited for the doctor to call and didn't have a lot of patience. And so I called the doctor. And finally, after several hours of waiting, I was able to speak to my primary care physician, who had one of those conversations with me that is forever cemented in my mind. And he just said, I don't even know what to say, but it appears there's a mass or a tumor between the end of your auditory canal and your brainstem. And I just didn't even, I was so ignorant about it at the time. I didn't know what to think. So I just wrote down everything that he said, every word that he said, every measurement, every little hint he gave me, I wrote down. And then I did what we all do. I Googled it, which was terrifying. It was terrifying to see the things that came up. And I realized that maybe that wasn't a good idea.
Yeah, I was just going to say, don't they tell you not to Google health issues because you always get the very worst things that pop up there? But we all want to do that.
We do want to do that because I think our natural inclination is we just want to figure it out. We want to figure it out. I mean, if we have a cough and a sore throat, we Google it to see what this could be. How long am I going to have to deal with this? And that's exactly what I thought I was doing, was just trying to get a sense for what was going on. But the things that came up were so devastating to read about that it really shook me to the core. And I talked to my husband, and he came home from work as soon as he could. And we were just kind of at a loss for what to say to each other, for what to do. And by the end of the day, the doctor's office called back and said, we called a neurosurgeon and he is going to see you on Monday morning. Now, this was a Friday afternoon. And not just was it a Friday afternoon, it was a Friday afternoon of Easter weekend. So it was spring break. There were people out of town. And yet they told me I was going to have an appointment with the neurosurgeon Monday morning. And I was just shocked by that. And the doctor said, well, I explained to the neurosurgeon the situation, so he cleared his schedule for you. And I thought, you explained the situation. Again, I knew that they knew something that I didn't. And so when I went to the neurosurgeon a few days later, my husband was with me and he just looked at me and he said, Mrs. Brown, in the brain, it is all about location, location, location. And I'm sorry to say, but your tumor is in a very bad location.
Wow.
What do you even, how do you even respond? And I think the thing that my husband struggled with was, okay, so what do we do? What are our options? And so we started asking, can we do chemo? Can we do radiation? Can we do a biopsy? And everything that came out of his mouth was no, no, no. You can't do chemo because we don't know what it is yet. And we don't want to have the chance of doing the wrong kind of treatment. You can't radiate it because if it turns out to be non-cancerous, then radiating it can actually make it turn cancerous. We can't do a biopsy because it's too dangerous because of the location around your brainstem. And every single thing that came out of his mouth was negative. And so finally, my husband just looked at him and said, if this were your wife or your daughter, what would you do? And he looked at me and said, I'm sorry, but I wouldn't touch you with a 10-foot pole.
Oh my goodness.
And my first thought was, do you have any kind of bedside manner? I mean, we're real people. We're already going through the most difficult time. And to say that in that particular way was just devastating. So we left that office and had one of those scenes that you see in the movies where the people are at the hospital and they throw their arms around each other and just sob because it really felt like he was just signing a death certificate saying, sorry, there's nothing we can do for you. So it was a devastating time and we had no idea how to talk to our young children about it, how to proceed, how to pretend like life was fine, because the reality was it wasn't. But we have a wonderful and supportive family. My parents were living in Hawaii at the time. My dad was the CEO of the Polynesian Cultural Center, and my mom flew out to come and be with us. She moved into our home to help take care of my kids and to help be my caregiver and advocate. And we just started trying to figure things out. All right, let's make other appointments. Let's go to more doctors. And very quickly, word got out amongst the neighborhood and friends of what was going on. And we were flooded by suggestions of people who wanted to help, people who had contacts at, Mayo Clinic or Johns Hopkins. And literally within a few days, my head was being examined around the world. And my MRI scans were just going everywhere to see if anyone had some solutions for us. And a few days later, my husband was at work and a woman came up to him and said, oh my gosh, Tolan, I've heard about your wife and I'm so sorry. But I just want to let you know that one of my best friends is a neurosurgeon at the University of Utah Hospital. And I asked him if he would be willing to take a look at your wife. And he said that he would. So she offered to get us this appointment. So he thanked her and we got the appointment. And 2 days later, we drove to the University of Utah to meet with Dr. William Coldwell. And when we got there, we found out he normally has about a 4-month wait in order to get in for an appointment. But because his friend had called him, we got in 2 days later on his lunch break, and he worked us into the schedule.
It pays to have friends.
Well, it was truly at that time miraculous. I mean, it really was. There are people who would say that that's too strong of a word, but for us, it was miraculous. And we sat in his office and he looked at the MRI scans quietly, just scanned through the images coming up on his screen. And then he looked at me and he said, I think I can do this. And
Wow.
just like that, he changed my inoperable diagnosis to an operable diagnosis. And we started the medical machine going. And he actually admitted me to the hospital right then and there. I didn't even get to go home and get a change of clothes. He admitted me to the hospital, sent my husband home to go get some things. And I stayed at the hospital to do a series of tests to get a better idea of what we were facing. I was in the hospital for 3 or 4 days and did hundreds and hundreds of tests and hours of MRIs. And that was how they came up with the game plan, which was that they were going to try to do one surgery to remove the tumor. And the hope was that I would be in the hospital for about 5 days. So on May 13th of 2009, I went in for my craniotomy. And, I said goodbye to my kids, kissed their foreheads as I walked out the door, not knowing if I was going to see them again. And that to this day is still one of the hardest moments for me to recall, is the thought of saying goodbye to my kids. So we went into the hospital and my dad flew into town. My mom was there. My husband was there. And I had the surgery. But the challenge came back that instead of one surgery, it turned out to be 3 craniotomies, 35 days in and out of neurocritical care, and a series of complications, including a spinal fluid leak. I had spinal fluid that's actually leaking out of my nose and down the back of my throat. Facial paralysis on the right side of my face. Couldn't blink my eye, couldn't hold food or fluids in my mouth, couldn't smile. And then I developed a condition called pneumocephalus, which is air on the brain, and a brain infection. And it was, honest to goodness, the biggest fight for my life I could have imagined.
So Jody, how are you doing now? I mean, I've got a billion questions running through my head here. One is, I want to jump to where you are now and the fact that you're able to leverage what you learned in this very difficult experience to help people today in a variety of ways. But I'm also curious, and I just want to ask this question because I'm just crazy curious. What was your attitude toward the doctor that said he wouldn't touch you with a 10-foot pole? How do you feel about that guy?
Let's put it this way. In my book, I changed his name for his own sake. I don't have a lot of positive feelings about him. However, on the positive side, I am very grateful that he said no, because had he operated on me, it probably would have killed me, because he clearly did not have the expertise to be able to do that. So I am grateful that he was honest. I'm not grateful for the way in which he was honest and the language that he used, but I'm glad he knew it was out of his league, because that probably saved my life right there. If I had turned my life over to his hands, I would probably not be here today. So I'm grateful for that, but I also don't have a whole lot of positive feelings about the way in which he talked to me and treated me. So that was a tough time. And as far as how I'm doing now, I would say I am doing fantastic. I have lots of struggles still. I have many deficits, but I am honestly living my best life. And what I learned from the brain tumor experience is you can't always choose whether you live or die. So many times I was just on the verge of death. There were numerous times I thought I wasn't going to make it through the night. And one time in particular, when my body started shutting down and we all thought it was the end. So you cannot always choose whether you live or die, but you can choose how you live. You can choose what to do with the time that you have. And you can choose whether you become better or you become bitter. And I just determined that with whatever time I had, I was going to become better. And that is really what I have focused on. And after I got out of the hospital and I realized my life was changed, I had all of these deficits. I was down to 90 pounds. I could hardly walk. I couldn't blink. I couldn't chew, or I had to learn how to do so many things over again. And it was hard. Everything I knew about my life just had been turned upside down. And I had a friend who came over and really helped me understand in a profound and powerful way that while I couldn't control a lot of the things that were happening, I did need to take control of what I could control. And I really embraced that, okay, I can't control so many of these things, but I have to take control of what I can control. And that started kind of a proactive approach to, all right, well, what can I do? Let's look at this and train as though I had a coach who was training me for an Olympic sport. What are the things I can do? What are the goals I can set? How can I get better in this and this and this? And one step at a time, how can I get forward, move myself forward and get where I need to go? So that's what I started doing, was just taking things one day at a time. And every time I was having a big challenge with my physical body, we tried to be proactive about it and say, okay, well, what can we do? What do we need to take care of? And that has resulted in, an additional dozen surgeries trying to repair the things that went wrong from the initial tumor removal. I've got a spring implanted in my eyelid that helps me to blink. I'm undergoing a process called facial reanimation, where they're taking nerves and muscles out of my thigh and implanting them into my face to restore some functionality to my face. We're doing everything we can to improve my quality of life and to make sure that I am able to live a long life. And honestly, I can tell you I'm doing great. And I am so grateful for my second chance at life.
Jody, what have you taken from this journey you've been on, this very, very difficult, unbelievably tough journey? How have you taken that and used it to help leaders and teams become better? I mean, you haven't let your own experience just be your own experience. You've taken it on the road. You've shared it freely. What have you learned about yourself and leadership and teams, and how are you putting that all into helping people put that into good use?
That's a good question. And I think what happened was people started asking me quickly, shortly after I got out of the hospital, people started asking me to share my story. And I didn't know why, but I just knew that for whatever reason, when I shared some of the experiences that I had, it inspired people and it gave them hope and it helped them to have a better attitude about their own lives and to look for positive ways to move forward. And it really turned into what now is my career, which is that I go and I share these insights with people and I talk to organizations about how to help people become better, regardless of the challenges that they're going through. And I realized that one of the biggest things that got me through everything was my group of people, my network. And I don't mean just my network in the business sense of the term, but I mean the people who surround me, who help me get through every day. They were literally the ones that I was fighting for when I had no more strength to fight for myself. And when you look at the people who are in your life and who are in your work environment, in your business and in your family, and you start to see them as irreplaceable, when you start to see that everyone around you has a reason for being in your life, then you start to look at things differently and you start to treat people with a different kind of respect. And I think about the woman who came and told my husband about the neurosurgeon friend that she had. And what would have happened had she not come forward and done that? We weren't great friends. My husband didn't know her very well. And yet she stepped forward with what ended up being life-saving information for us. And when you think of the fact that there's 7 billion people on the planet, and you choose to look at the people around you not as they're there by chance, but instead they're there for some divine purpose, then you start to see everyone in a more positive light, and you start to see people more at their own heart. So I think one of the things that I've learned is you can't take those people around you for granted. And part of that means you need to have relationships with them, not just know them and pass in the hall with a, formal sense of being kind, but that you really should get to know the people so that you can find out what they're going through, so that they can find out what you're going through, and so that you can help each other through it.
Relationships matter.
Relationships matter. They matter. They matter. They matter. In fact, it's the only thing that really matters when it comes down to it.
You've coined the term that a term that I hadn't even heard before, much less use it. And that term is anti-fragile. And that's a message you've been delivering to leaders and teams in your work. I've always used the term that's perhaps overused and talked about the importance of resilience, being able to bounce back when you get knocked down. And a lot of people talk about resilience, but why do you like anti-fragile? And what's the difference in your mind between those two words? And just tell us a little bit about what it means to be anti-fragile.
Well, I would say that resilience is vastly important. It is important. Of course, it's important. But there is a difference between being anti-fragile and being resilient. So resilient is bouncing back. It's getting back to being as good as you were. You can even think of being robust. Well, robust usually means that you were good enough that something didn't impact you in the way it could have impacted others. But when you think about being anti-fragile means that you take the things that would otherwise weaken or destroy you, and you become better because of them. Not in spite of them, but because of them. You actually learn to thrive. It is a property of systems where you increase in your capability to thrive because of the stressors, attacks, and volatility. And the truth is, I didn't coin the term. There's a man named Nassim Taleb who coined the term. He's a mathematician and statistician, but he was really talking about it in terms of systems, of software systems, of economies, of governments, and how when there's some chaos or crisis in the world, how can you create a government or an economy that gets stronger instead of weaker during those times? But I loved the term. I loved the word. I loved what it stood for. And I kept waiting for him to break it down to the point where it applied to me, where it was about people and not just about systems. And it never quite got there to my satisfaction. And so when I talk about it now, it's more in the terms of what can we do personally and within businesses to become stronger because of the things that we are going through instead of in spite of them.
So I would imagine there's a strong need for intentionality in order to become anti-fragile. I mean, it just doesn't happen. It would seem that we've got to make some very intentional efforts and have a plan, and you leverage the circumstances we're in a positive way. So how does an individual or how does a leader thinking about building an anti-fragile team, how do we do that? What are the steps we take? How do we become more intentional about becoming stronger as a result of the adversities we face?
Well, I think the first thing is to recognize that we have the opportunity to respond, that we have the chance to adapt and respond to every situation. And so when you build in the fact that you're going to have to respond, you get to choose your response. And when you choose a response that's going to be adaptive, when you say, okay, I'm going to be intentional about it, just deciding that right there means that you are looking at the heart of it. And instead of just being, blasé and letting it go, that you're actually going to do something about it. You're going to respond in the best way possible. So the first thing is to have an adaptive system where you can adjust to threats and you can respond quickly and as well as you can with as little interruption to normal daily business or normal life as possible. So if you can keep things going while still responding to things that could threaten you, think about it like your immune system. When a foreign cell, when a diseased cell comes into your body, your system keeps everything going, keeps you functioning as well as possible, but it's sending out all of the troops to try and attack and get rid of that foreign invader. And so it's responding and adapting as the threats come. And not only does it respond, but then it also kind of takes a photographic image so that if that threat comes again, it detects it, it remembers it, and it's able to fight it off faster the next time. So by being intentional and using an adaptive system to decide what you're going to do in your response and not just let things happen, that is part of the first steps, is deciding what your response and how you're going to adapt.
So it sounds like there's no room to be a victim. There's no time for that. We've got to be an action-oriented agent to respond, and there's no time to feel sorry for ourselves. Is that what you're saying?
I would say that if you can do that, that is going to be your best. You'll get the best possible results. That's not to say there's not time to mourn for things that are truly going on. When you have big losses, if you have a fire, if you lose a business, of course, there's going to be a stage of mourning, and there's going to be things that happen mentally and emotionally in order to be able to deal with that. But honestly, the faster that you can get out of, not just get out of the mourning phase, but the faster that you can get into that action stage where you are taking proactive steps to make changes, the better you will be, because then you are doing just what my friend said, which is taking control of the things you can control. And as soon as you take that control back into your own hands, you're able to start moving forward in a more positive way.
We read a lot these days, and I just read this yesterday. I think it was in the New York Times. I saw this, that we're in the middle of something the media's coined the Great Resignation. And in the month of November, 4.5 million people quit their jobs, and that's the highest number in history. What's going on? Are we, as a country, as a world, responding to these difficult situations we've all experienced with the pandemic and the challenges and political turmoil and feeling disconnected? Is our response to tap out and just check out? How does fragility explain this, or does it explain it? Is there a connection?
Absolutely. I believe there's a great connection, because when you think about the kinds of benefits that companies were offering before the pandemic, besides your physical, oh, here's your insurance and here's your 401k, it was things like, okay, what's your work environment going to be like? Oh, we have the really desirable companies had ping pong tables and rooms where you could go play. You could go and get a massage. You could work out on the premises. And those were the kinds of things that people saw as benefits, because everyone was there. And so they were trying to make the work environment as positive as possible. Well, you fast forward 2 years and the work environment is totally different. For a huge portion of the working population, they're now working remotely. They're working at home, and they are realizing that they can still have that time to accomplish the things they need to for work, and have the experience of being able to be there for their families and have that work-life balance in a way that perhaps was never there before. And so companies who are now saying, all right, as numbers change and as numbers go down, we're going to have everyone come back into the office full time. All of a sudden, people are saying, well, wait a minute. I know I can do this at home now. I know that I can do this and still be able to drop my kids off at school or take the dog for a walk during my lunch break. Why would I want to go back into a situation that takes all of that freedom away from me and where I lose all of that flexibility? So I think a big part of the Great Resignation is that people are going to start demanding a different work situation. They're going to want to have more flexibility and more control of their time and how that time is spent and the hours in which they work. Now, how does that relate to anti-fragility? Well, I would say that an anti-fragile team and an anti-fragile leader will take things into their own hands in the sense of identifying the changes that have happened and helping kind of bridge that gap and coming up with flexible work solutions. Maybe it's not every day that you can work at home, but maybe we can come up with a flexible situation where you can have 2 or 3 days work at home. So you can still have time to do some of those things that you've gotten used to being able to do at home. One of the things that I talk to teams and leaders about the most is a concept I call weigh in. And I'll just tell you a quick story as to what it means. But years ago, I worked for a hospital, and we got an HR challenge that came down. They said, hey, we want everyone to participate in this health and wellness challenge. As part of that, we're asking everyone to have a weight loss, to participate in this weight loss challenge. Well, my team decided that rather than doing the weight loss challenge individually, we would do it as a group. And every Monday morning, we went downstairs to the freight scale, and we all got on this giant freight scale together. We still set weight loss goals. We still held accountability sessions where we looked at what our overall weight loss or gain was every week. But by doing it as a team, we were able to take some of the pressure off of the individual and share it amongst us. And I share that story because if we were to do that a little bit more, as far as our teams are concerned and our families are concerned, if we were to share the load a little bit better by finding out what things people are going through, what are the things that are weighing down the people in our lives? What are the responsibilities and the roles and the weight that they're carrying? Many times things that are outside of what they're facing at work. Who might be caring for an aged parent or has a family member that is sick or who's struggling with some financial challenges? As we really look at people and decide that we're going to help share that load, we can more effectively work together, not only individually, but as a team, because it's not all just based on someone's ability. It's not just on their capability, it's also on what they're able to handle at any one moment. And no matter how capable someone is, if they're drowning at the moment because they have too much weight on their shoulders, then they're not going to be able to perform the way we want or the way that they want.
And the key to that sounds like being proactive and thinking ahead, not just reacting when something happens, but think about what we can do proactively to share that load. And I love that message. You know, there's a number of common misconceptions about dealing with people when they're going through some really tough stuff. I know I sometimes don't know what to say or whether I should say anything at all to someone who I've heard is having some medical issue or something really tough in their life, something difficult at home is happening, because I don't want to be intrusive. I don't want to cross the line, but I also care and I want to let people know that I care and that I want to be supportive. You were on the receiving end of a lot of that. What did you want from colleagues during your darkest moments and throughout the journey? How can we support people who are going through difficult circumstances in a productive way and not cross the line? And it may be different for different people, but tell us your perspective on that.
It is going to be different for different people. Some people are very, very private and don't want anything out there about their personal situation. However, they're also going to recognize it's going to get out there. If they're missing work, if something's going on, it's going to be known to some extent. And I would say that what is the best thing you can do? You're not sure sometimes if you should say something, if you shouldn't say something. I always think it's better to say something. Even if you're not sure what you could say, what's the most appropriate thing, just say, I'm sorry you're going through this, or I'm thinking about you, or I'm praying for you. I just want you to know I'm here for you. Because that's the big thing, is you just want to know that you are being remembered and that there are people there who care about you. There were so many times when it would have been so much easier for me to just give up the fight. But I had so many people who were fighting for me, who were checking in with me on a daily basis, saying, I'm thinking about you. I'm praying for you. I'm fasting for you. I'm sending treats to your kids. All of those things showed me that people cared. And when it came down to it, I wanted to fight for everyone else, even when my own strength was gone. So even if it's as small as send a text or write a card or send an email or a little quick video message, whatever it is, there's no such thing as a small act of kindness when you're in need. When you are the one who is struggling, every intentional act where someone reaches out to you literally can be the difference between you having the strength and not having the strength to keep going for that day. So I would always say, when in doubt, do it.
And we're always stronger in community. I think it was Helen Keller that said, alone we can do so little, but together we can do so much. So that's a great message. Jody, how can leaders, folks who are listening to this call and thinking about their teams and their situation, I always like to end my conversations with folks with, some advice, some practical advice on what we can start doing today, this afternoon, tomorrow, whenever you're listening to this. What can we do immediately? How do we take action and put what you're telling us to the test in our environments?
I love that. Practical application is so important. I would say the most important thing that you can do is start something like a weigh-in, where maybe it's a daily huddle, maybe it's at your weekly staff meeting, but take time for your staff to check in with each other and make it a place where there's a circle of safety, where it's okay for people to open up and be a little bit more personal for a few minutes. But when everyone is open, then they are also willing to share the burden with those who are experiencing struggles, and they'll help share the load so that you can all improve together. So start by having a weigh-in, find a time, decide that your Monday morning staff meeting or your daily huddle or whatever it is, that you're going to start encouraging that so that it becomes a normal way of doing business. And it shows you and shows all of your team that you care about each other.
It's balancing the people aspects of work with what we need to get done, the performance piece. And that's what I write about, talk about. And I'm glad you were with us today to give us your perspective, Jody. It's such a powerful story, and I'm so grateful that you're here and you're continuing to fight. You're strong. You are not fragile. How can listeners get in touch with you, Jody, if they want to hear more of your story, read your books? How can they get in touch with you?
I am very active on social media, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, Facebook. You can find me on any of those platforms. And also my books are all available on Amazon.com. It's probably the easiest place. They're also on, Barnes & Noble and most other book retailers. And then as far as being able to reach me, you can email me at Jody, Jodi, at globalleadergroup.com. Or you can find out more and see some of my speaking, my keynotes and training topics at globalleadergroup.com/Jodi, Jodi.
Awesome. And I'll have all of that in the show notes so people can just link to you that way. Jody, thank you so much for being on the Mission First People Always podcast today. I think this message is encouraging or will be encouraging to many. And I'm so glad that you were willing to jump on with me to share. And to all my listeners, thanks for joining. We'll have another episode and another great guest coming up. So stay tuned. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to create a stronger, more people-centric and empowered culture for your organization, visit drmikepatterson.com.